employing closing techniques is typically a negative, especially if you're in complex or very relational sales.
I've had hundreds of authors on Sales Babble, so it begs the question, if you desire to grow your sales skills, which of the books should you read? Which one should you skip? Our guest Alex Dripchak solves this problem with his new book that surveys 27 best-selling authors and then ranks the 100 most critical skills to succeed found in those books. Today, Alex and I babble about the 100 skills of the successful sales professional.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Welcome, Alex. Are you ready to babble?
I am indeed. I love that intro. Thanks for having me.
You're the author of a new book. It's called 100 Skills of the Successful Sales Professional, your guidebook to establishing and elevating your career. This just came out, right?
Yeah, so mid-June, so we're about 6 weeks in.
That's great. This is a very interesting book. I spent quite a bit of time with it, and the first question I had was, this is actually, maybe you could describe the book to you. This is actually a book about books, right?
It kind of is, yes. It's a consolidation, curation, collation, all the different Asians of 27 best-selling different sales and relationship building books. So I read through them all and I said, wouldn't it be great if people just kind of cut out the extraneous information, boiled down to the key elements, and instead of approaching from a methodical or procedural lens, they took a skill-oriented lens. And that's how we have this book meets blog meets list format.
How did you come to these 27?
So some of them, the first one I actually ever read was, I don't want to say assigned reading, but was given to us when I started at Oracle a number of years ago. And it collected a bit of dust on my shelf before I opened it up. But I had some extra time on my hands in the summer, and I wanted to sit out in the park and sit down, let me read this book. And then I found some valuable insights in it, and I kind of got hooked and just said, oh, what else is there to read? And I just became, very well acquainted with Amazon and all the different HubSpot, all the different lists of best-selling sales books, and one by one just started picking them off.
What was that book?
Oh, the Challenger Sale was the
yes.
first. Yeah.
We've talked about that book many times here. Yes. Pros and cons.
For sure.
I noticed here that at the top of the page, you got this quote from Lee Salz, remarkably curated, action-oriented playbook and how to achieve excellence. Lee's been on the podcast.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, Lee's a good guy.
How many of these authors have you actually spoken to?
So I reached out to a few of them. Let's see. So Lee, Jerry's also one of the endorsers. Vanessa Van Edwards actually was just after I finished my 27 books, but her book Captivate is fantastic, especially for networking and just kind of in-person interactions, being a great conversation partner. So in that way, I kind of view her as almost a modern day Dale Carnegie. So she was great as well. And then I reached out to a few other folks, some of which we traded some good emails and such. So I would say I probably reached out to maybe 6 or 7 of them. I pretty much heard back from everybody. It was a very interesting discourse. They loved hearing that they were quoted in a book.
So they liked it. They didn't feel like you were taking some of their material and making money on it or something like that. They didn't feel they were open about this. Yeah,
no, not at all. I don't think anybody has any significant discourse in here. I think, it's usually a paraphrase or, kind of a perspective. Like, here's what Lee Salz would say. Check out his book. So I kind of, I don't want to say name drop a lot there for their books, but it's definitely more promotional or endorsing their great work than it is me taking, an entire page out of their book and pasting it in my own.
So if you look at all these books, you've read all of them, and if you were to factor out the commonalities, what did you see were like the top 3 skills?
Yeah. So, I think what really opened my eyes was this not leading out with your own solutions. And also, first off, not even talking about products. It should be solutions over products. And then even better than solutions would be entering from the right, as Anthony Areno would say, is providing the most value to your client. What's most valuable to them, not, what's most valuable to you. So, okay, for me, benefits brokerage would be my biggest opportunity to sell something. And that's where I could make the most money or had the biggest impact on my organization in my day job. But that might not be the fit for everybody else. So let me think about what would be a good fit for them, either inside or outside of my solutions. And a lot of times I talk about it a few times in the book about what can you give to them first? How can you go first, give first, in order for them to either feel some kind of indebtedness and obligation or just to you. So I talk about a number of different opportunities throughout the book on how you can kind of reduce their workload, provide value, approach from their perspective, and take kind of the long-term view. So I would say the number one thing that tied it all together would be this approaching from their lens and not your own. And it's something that a lot of people say, but very, very, very few people do. And I actually have a funny story about that recently.
Well, don't leave us hanging.
Yeah. So there was one call I was on for a new tool that we were getting in at Mercer, which is my day job. And everyone's like, oh, this is so good. This is so good. I'm looking forward to using this tool. And then I said, does this have any benefit to our clients and prospects? And the person who has at a major company, across all different sales reps at the most reputable software and consulting organizations said, I've never gotten that question before. I was like, really? No one has ever asked if this is helpful for their clients and prospects? So it was a little strange considering it wasn't like it was an internal tool. It was a two-way communication platform. So it's like, nobody asked about the other side for thousands of people you've talked to. So it's eye-opening.
Yeah. I just had a conversation with a startup guy, and I tried to explain to him that you need to understand your client's industry as well as they understand their industry. Twice removed. And that just like, I guess that totally makes sense. But a lot of people don't think that way. They think about anyway. So that's one top skill. What are a couple other top skills that you saw that were common in all of these books?
Yeah, I would say one that's probably anecdotal that people have heard a number of times is resiliency. It's the skill you need most often in sales, which I talk about in the book. Just about, riding the highs and not letting the lows get you down too much. I think that's something that is a proverbial topic in sales, so I won't beat that to death. I think that some of the other ones that were really valuable to me would be like centering around questions. What kind of questions do you ask? Approaching from the whole topic of not only the questions you ask, but how you ask those questions, how you kind of segue or pivot or transition into those questions and topics. So the whole art of query, not to give away too much of the book, is one of the top skills. So I've read certain books that are actually just about sales questions too. And it's not really what you can say about your solution, or it's really getting them to kind of find it for themselves. And I think there's an old adage that says, if you say it, it's sold, but if they say it, it's gold. So trying to make sure you are propping up your customer or your prospect to come up with those great ideas, answer those really difficult questions or really enlightening questions in order to kind of spark and energize their decision to make a purchase.
Let's flip this question.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you saw in a lot of these books that you disagree with, that you think just is no longer relevant these days?
So there were some books I read on closing techniques that I did not agree with. And I think actually Lee Sauls, one of your former people, would back this up. So Lee and I are very similar in our thinking and methodologies. But I saw some books from like Brian Tracy and a little bit from some of the older folks in the 80s and 90s. They were talking all about the puppy dog close and the Ben Franklin close and all these different closing techniques. And I think there's just a lot of things to be concerned about there because first off, if you try a closing technique or even closed-ended questions too early, people are going to have their guard up. So I think sometimes some of these salespeople are looking for that one tip that's going to win them the business. And I think it's a little backhanded. I think it's more about consistent excellence throughout each step of the process and differentiating at every stage, which Lee talks about a lot. So I think that employing closing techniques is typically a negative, especially if you're in complex or very relational sales.
Yeah. Any others?
Off the top of my head, that's the one that I definitely didn't agree with. I think sometimes the books got a little bit too down the rabbit hole of their experiences and background, I'd be reading 40, 50, 60 pages about them that didn't really apply to some of the other readers. So that's why I said, I want to cut out some of this and really just focus in on key examples from my experience rather than a bunch of superfluous background. So I think that was one kind of just stylistic part of writing that I tried to eliminate in my books. I think outside of that, one of the most, I don't want to say controversial, but one of the most different ideas I had in the book was not following up, which sounds really strange, but finding ways to follow up that weren't directly about the sale or the deal you're working on. So kind of providing a parallel path or street. So you have the deal street and you might not be hearing back about that, but what correlates to that deal path that can still provide value and you can still be out in front of them without annoying them? Like, yeah, I know I owe you an answer about this deal.
So how would you do that?
So for me, it's usually some kind of webinar or event or maybe some kind of collateral or trend data. So if they're evaluating something within the benefits domain, which I mentioned earlier, then I might be providing them, okay, here's a benchmarking survey data cut that we have for your industry on what employers are offering for voluntary benefits. Like that's just one example. But it also could be an event or a webinar, a seminar. There are a number of different ways to find that parallel path.
What you're looking for isn't just an excuse to follow up, but and just to be top of mind, just to make sure you're still top of mind for them.
You're top of mind and you're continuing to provide value.
Providing value. Yep. That whole give to get, the Bob Berg thing. Yeah. Yeah. These skills in this book, there's 100 of them. And it seems like, is there an order to them? It seemed like there was kind of a countdown. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. It's supposed to be a priority countdown. So the top 10 should be more impactful to your sales success than the first 10.
How did you come to that?
So that was some of the commonalities I saw in other books, and then also drawing upon my experiences and my network's experiences. So I had a few pre-readers, and some of them gave me some feedback, like, "Hey, number 63, I think should be like 36." So I got some of that feedback from sales leaders and sales personnel, but a lot of it was kind of me arranging it based on what I've seen from these other sales books.
So that goes to the question: what makes you the right guy to write this book?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think it's just because I'm an avid reader. So that's probably where I would focus most of the answer to that question is.
Although you said you'd never read the first book.
I never read the first book until I started this process. Yeah. So that was avid reader for the last about 3 years now, 3.5 years.
It's a new hobby. Gotcha.
Yeah. So in that time, I picked off a lot of books very quickly, but I annotate everything that I read. I type up all those notes afterwards, and I kind of pick through the commonalities. So I think a lot of people kind of read a little bit more skimming or kind of informational, like they hone in on what they find valuable to them. Whereas I took a very holistic approach, and when I put the book down, that's nowhere near the end of the process. So I think that intensive read through and note taking is probably the reason why I'm qualified to provide a curation of the 27 different books. I think it's just a new style. So I wrote a lot in high school and college, and I thought, I want to find something that's different. The book format, I think, is a little outdated, outmoded. So how can I fuse it with some of the other kind of formats? So this list or, kind of the way it reads is a little bit more like a blog, a little more conversational and taking the reader's mindset into account. So I think it's just a whole different style.
Each one of these are standalone.
Yeah.
You can read, they're like little essays, actually. And they all follow up with an action item. There's something underneath it that I never quite understood. It has the number of minutes. What's that about?
So if you ever go on the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or something like that, they'll tell you how long a section takes to read.
Oh.
So yeah, that's why you have the 1, 2, 3 minutes to let you know how much time you have to dedicate just to read it. Never mind annotate. But so that's the different factor there.
Cool. Another thing that was interesting about the book is that at the front you got a chart. I would say more of a table that's broken up across individual preparation, relationship building, meeting effectiveness, mindset and strategy, negotiation, persuasion, and internal development.
Right.
And these point to the articles back in there so that people, it's kind of a handy dandy guide. Did you ever consider like tagging these, some kind of, I see what you're trying to do. This is kind of a filtering, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a deep dive drill down. So if you think you're really, really strong at relationship building, but you need more help on your mindset and strategy, then you can just jump to those specific skills. So, if it's, and I have some different ways, like I have an article posted on my website to kind of help you understand where you're strong, and kind of a little self-evaluation. So then you can say, oh, you know what, I'm doing really well at negotiation and persuasion, but I need help on meeting effectiveness. So it's kind of a short, even though it's already a consolidation, it's an even shorter version for people that want to just jump into the areas most impactful to them.
Yeah. I really, really liked it. After writing this book, how has it affected your selling?
So, number of different ways. So I also have a new business I've launched. So that's on college to career consulting. So going to corporations and colleges with that initiative. I've been taking some different pages out of the book to help with that. But I think it's really helped me launch a few different roundtables and industry events. So I now lead 3 different industry events at Mercer. And that's really provided an avenue where people are clamoring for joining these groups. And the hit rate is much higher than if I ever let out with these events in the past. So how I kind of frame things and making sure that I'm providing value and introducing them to peers that are going to be of interest to them has been terrific. So I think that's really been one of the biggest impacts is the leading out and providing value and approaching from their perspective has changed my pursuit process.
So that, right. And that's the first thing you brought up at the beginning was probably the one and number one commonality across all of them was this whole, not leading with the solution.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of what we talked about in the past, like when I was at Oracle, would be not talking about a product, but a solution. And that was kind of step one. But I think the even bigger step, which I found from all these books, is not even leading out the solution, but leading out with value and value how they perceive it, not how you perceive it. So it's almost like a 3 or 4 checkpoint gate of where can you provide the most value. Products would be the very small end of the spectrum, which a lot of salespeople do. Solutions is a little better than products. Value how you perceive it is better than solutions. And then value how they would perceive it is better than value how you would perceive it.
Right. Is there one thing in all of this reading that really surprised and shocked you?
It's a good question. I think what surprised me most is just how much information could be cut. I noticed, and one of the things I noticed, which I hope never happened in my book since I read it judiciously, is I noticed a lot of like typos and little errors. And then I just found, I'm like, okay, with the exception of one book, every book I read you can cut 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 pages out of it. It just did not provide value. And, as a reader, I'm like, I would appreciate somebody just doing something very consolidated. And that was the big genesis behind the book. But the big finding for me is like, wow, there's a lot of, superfluous information in here.
So have you made a list of books not to read?
I wouldn't say not to read. I found...
And could you read that list to me right now?
I found value in all 27 of them. I'm not going to fall for that. No. I think I already said one of them earlier that I didn't find as much value, but I don't really value closing techniques. So any books around that were not as high on the list as ones that were more relational or question-oriented.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. You briefly mentioned this, but not in my name. You have this organization called Commence.
Yes.
Which actually means to start.
Yeah, exactly.
What's Commence?
Oh, so it's a college to career skill development program. So teaching all the students what they wish they learned earlier and preventing, them from not knowing about how to invest and the power of networking and your connections and just really taking them through all the professional, financial, and social skills that they're going to need in life after college. So to give you an example, it starts with how to network, and it really goes all the way through productivity, meta learning maxims, and also on emotional intelligence and financial savvy. So there are 11 courses in total, and we're building a 12th on career mapping, kind of career pathing of what are all the options out there for college students. I think a lot of people aren't aware of certain industries.
And who do you sell these to? Universities?
Yes, so universities and corporations. So corporations do like a new hire training, so it'd be a scaled down.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then for colleges, it would be the full, program, full 12 courses.
That's great. Yeah,
thanks.
So people wanted to connect with you.
Yeah.
What's the best way of doing that?
Depends what they want to connect on. But so there are a few different avenues. So the book, there's 100salesskills.com and some options there to get in touch with us. And then there is commenceyourcareer.com for the Commence program. And then, of course, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Alex Dripchak. We're also on at Commence. And Are You Workforce Ready is our handle on Instagram for any of our younger listeners.
Cool. Your book is available on Amazon, I assume?
Yeah, Amazon. Business Expert Press is the publisher, so it's available on their website, Barnes & Noble, and then, of course, on the 100salesskills.com and a number of other different platforms.
Awesome. I'll make sure and put all this, everything that was mentioned here in the show notes. So if you're driving right now, you don't have to worry about taking notes. If you could leave the audience with a piece of advice they could take action on this week, and we're talking about sales professionals, what would that be?
So I think as a natural segue here, you were just talking about how you're going to make your audience's life easier by putting it in the show notes and also making it easier in case they're driving. So I think about how you can reduce your client's workload and think about how you can add the most value. So I already talked extensively about value, so I'll talk about the client workload. One of the easiest examples is providing a sample RFP. A lot of folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of folks have only done something maybe once or twice. You've gone through it 100, 200 times. So you know that framework, and you can also, kind of stack the deck in your favor a little bit with some of the questions that are in there. But it's a mutually beneficial opportunity.
Yeah. We just had the GovCast guys here. We talked all about RFPs. That's a great. That's a great way of doing that. That's a great way of framing your company the best, and you're being helpful.
Yeah. So those are the win-wins.
Yeah, I love that. Well, with that said, Alex, thank you very much for babbling here on Sales Babble. It's been fun talking about your book, 100 Skills of Sales. 100 Skills of the Successful Sales Professional.
It's easier to read than it is to say. I'll put it that way.
It's a big alliteration here. Lots of S's. Yeah. It's been great. It's been great chatting here about this awesome book. Really, really enjoyed it. I probably read a good third of it, and
hopefully you'll read some more.
I read the front, and then of course, just as you recommended. I don't know if you recommended, but I just couldn't help but do it. I'm like, well, I'm going to read the last 10. Right?
Yeah. So hopefully you got my little joke then at number 1 for everybody who skipped to the end.
I love it.
Well, awesome. Thanks a lot, Pat. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, I particularly liked Alex's views on the silliness of studying closing techniques. Because look, if you're having an authentic conversation with the prospect and you're able to show the value of your solution in the context of their pains and their desires, hey, they're going to buy. Collectively, the two of you will agree that it's a good fit. You don't need tricks and traps to close deals. You just need honest and authentic conversations. To connect with Alex and to read his book, I've shared links in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. And if you could do me a favor, if you could share this episode with somebody in your organization that you think might find value in it, just one person, hey, that's all we need. I would really appreciate it. The same thing's true on social media. I do a post every week on Sales Babble. If you could comment on LinkedIn, that would really help promote the podcast. Do me a favor and help us out. Well, that's all I've got for this week, folks. Until next week, take care and have a highly productive and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.